All right, let's just jump right in. Today, in this explainer, we are looking at the fall of the Aztec Empire. You know, this is an event so often dramatized in pop culture as a great civilization destroyed in mere days. We're going to unpack this historical moment, which, to be honest, is completely surrounded by myth, just to uncover the complex reality of how this incredible Mesoamerican empire actually collapsed.
So the crucial question we're exploring today is exactly that. How does a mighty empire actually fall? For centuries, the popular narrative we were all taught in school has basically been that the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan fell simply because of a few hundred heroic, unstoppable Spaniards. But as we're going to see, the truth is actually a much more complex web of shifting geopolitical alliances, devastating diseases, and some seriously grueling siege warfare.
Section 1. Clash of Two Worlds. Let's start by setting the stage back in 1519, where two very different worlds collided for the very first time. Picture this. When the Spanish, led by Hernán Cortés, first arrived from across the Eastern Sea, they were absolutely blown away by the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan. They were looking at an island metropolis. It was an immense city of floating gardens, bustling markets just overflowing with goods, and a highly organized military. Honestly, it was as sophisticated and populous as anything in Europe at the time. Now, initially, Emperor Moctezuma welcomed the Spaniards. He lowered the bridges, offered them gifts of gold and feathers, but mutual suspicion quickly took root. The Aztecs naturally had to wonder, were these strange newcomers divine envoys, or were they conquerors in disguise? And this comparison brilliantly illustrates the immediate technological disparity between the two forces when that initial tension inevitably broke. Look at the Aztec arsenal. They fought with the macuiltol. These were terrifying wooden clubs embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades, along with bows, spears, and thick cotton armor that they actually hardened in salt water. Contrasting that, the Spanish arrived with steel swords, crossbows, cannons, and completely unfamiliar assets like war horses and fierce dogs of war. It was literally stone and wood going up against steel and gunpowder.
Moving to Section 2, Translators and Native Allies. Now here's the real kicker of this phase. Weapons alone did not give the Spanish their foothold. In fact, they were vastly outnumbered. What saved them was communication, translation, and some deeply rooted local resentment toward the Aztec Empire.
Enter La Malinche. She was an enslaved, Nahuatl-speaking woman presented to the Spanish early on in their expedition, and she became the indispensable translator and diplomatic bridge between Cortés and the Mesoamerican world. She picked up Spanish incredibly fast and played an absolutely vital role. When Cortés met Moctezuma, it was La Malinche who translated the really complex, reverential speech of the Aztecs. Without her unique ability to navigate these cultural and linguistic divides, the Spanish would have been completely isolated. They would have been flying blind.
But perhaps the most critical turning point of the entire conflict was the Tlaxcalan alliance. You see, the Aztec Empire was not universally loved. They demanded heavy tribute and captives for sacrifice from the people they conquered. Tlaxcala, which was a powerful neighboring city-state, had fiercely resisted Aztec rule for decades. So, when the Spanish showed up, the Tlaxcaltecs saw a golden opportunity for revenge. They negotiated an alliance, which, by the way, was heavily facilitated by La Malinche, and they provided Cortés with tens of thousands of seasoned warriors. They gave the Spaniards food, safe harbor, and invaluable tactical knowledge of the landscape. Practically overnight, Cortés's tiny force swelled into a massive native army.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Night of Sorrows. This was a devastating turning point that completely shatters that whole myth of an easy, sweeping European victory. The Spanish called it La Noche Triste.
Look at this timeline and see how rapidly the tension escalated. Back in 1519, Cortés arrives as an honored guest. But fast forward just 1 year to 1520, and the Spanish had treacherously seized Moctezuma, holding him hostage inside his own palace. The tension finally boiled over during a religious festival, when Spanish soldiers unexpectedly massacred unarmed Aztec celebrants and priests right in the Great Square. This sparked a furious, massive uprising. Moctezuma is killed, though historical accounts actually differ on exactly how that happened, and the Spanish are forced to flee for their lives under the cover of darkness. This leads right into the infamous Night of Sorrows in 1520, setting the stage for the final siege. Just listen to this quote from Bernal Díaz del Castillo. He was a Spanish soldier who actually survived that night. He writes, "The water opening was soon filled up with dead horses, Indian men and women, servants, baggage, and boxes. This harrowing account describes the Spaniards' panicked midnight retreat along these narrow causeways in the pouring rain. Aztec war canoes surrounded them in the dark.
Countless Spanish soldiers, weighed down by stolen Aztec gold that they greedily refused to leave behind, slipped and drowned in the canals, dragged straight to the bottom of the lake. It was a catastrophic and humiliating defeat for the invaders.
Section 4. The Final Siege. Having barely survived the Night of Sorrows, Cortés retreated to the safety of his allies in Tlaxcala. There, he licked his wounds and began planning a brutal, highly systematic blockade of the Aztec capital.
Their new strategy was incredibly methodical. Step 1. Cortés ordered the construction of brigantines. These were small, fast-sailing warships equipped with cannons. Step 2. In a frankly unbelievable feat of logistics, they built them inland, in pieces, and physically carried them overland to Lake Texcoco, reassembling them right there on the water. Step 3. Using these ships and their massive indigenous army, they blockaded the canals and severed the city's supply lines completely. It became a deadly tug-of-war. By day, the Spanish and Tlaxcalans advanced, tearing down the causeway bridges. But by night, Aztec engineers valiantly rebuilt them. Under their new, defiant ruler Cuauhtémoc, the Aztecs were trapped in a horrific 3-month siege.
Now, while superior weaponry definitely gave the Spanish an initial tactical advantage, the true structural cause of the collapse was something else entirely. It was a biological weapon. The catastrophic introduction of unfamiliar foreign diseases, particularly smallpox, completely decimated the Aztec population. Because they had absolutely no natural immunity, the disease swept through the besieged, overcrowded city like wildfire. It killed massive numbers of people and severely weakened the Aztec army from the inside out before the final battles were even fought.
The profound human tragedy of this siege is captured in these primary accounts from indigenous sources. The text literally laments how broken spears lie in the roads, and notes that the water in the lake had turned bitter and tasted of brine. For months, tens of thousands of people trapped inside Tenochtitlan died from starvation, resorting to eating roots and leather just to survive. The summer heat only worsened the rampant sickness, and all the while, grueling hand-to-hand combat continued as the attackers pushed forward, house by house. Eventually, the once proud capital was reduced to smoking rubble, and Emperor Cuauhtémoc was captured in a canoe while trying to escape.
Section 5. Dispelling the Conquest Myths. With the city completely in ruins by August 13, 1521, let's step back for a moment. We need to dismantle some historical myths that have been passed down for centuries as established fact. Astonishingly, during the final siege of the city, less than 1% of the attackers were actually Spanish. You heard that right. Over 99% of the army destroying Tenochtitlan were indigenous allies. This obviously included the Tlaxcaltecs, but also many former Aztec subjects who eagerly joined the siege to overthrow their imperial rulers. It was overwhelmingly an indigenous force that ultimately brought the city down.
Historian Matthew Restall breaks this down brilliantly for us, dismantling 3 massive myths. First, as we just saw, the attackers were almost entirely indigenous Mesoamericans. Second, the conquest absolutely did not end with the fall of the capital in 1521. Actually, scratch that idea entirely because military campaigns and fierce resistance lasted for decades afterward, all across the region. And third, it was not some astonishing Spanish military miracle. The Fall of Tenochtitlan was essentially a complex Mexican civil war that the Spanish actively exploited, combined with the devastating, invisible effects of foreign diseases.
I want to leave you with this final thought. If the Aztec Empire was truly brought down by native alliances and invisible diseases rather than a handful of European super soldiers, how completely does that change the history you were taught? When we strip away these centuries of colonial propaganda, we uncover a much richer, vastly more complex, and deeply tragic history of how the geopolitical balance of the Americas was permanently reshaped. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning what you think you know.